I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically. Totally. Oh my gosh. It's amazing. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone. Hello, welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast, here with my co-host Jamie, and we have a guest today, Annie Schuler, and we're going to be talking about the menstrual cycle, but kind of in a unique way. We're going to talk about symbolism. Annie is originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I think now you live in Buffalo, New York. We talked about that. She's married, expecting her second baby, so congratulations on that. And as far as we know, it's a little girl, and you're excited to be able to share what you know someday about the menstrual cycle with your own daughter. But she studied biology at Franciscan University, and we're going to talk about her book, which is called Women of All Seasons, the Symbolism of the Menstrual Cycle, which obviously fits with the Hormone Genius. And, we're even going to go in probably to some of the details of the menstrual cycle, which will be great because it's always good to review the beauty and the science of the body. So, Annie, let's just dive in. Tell us about what was the original inspiration for writing the book. Why did you start to really care so much about the menstrual cycle and how it really impacts a woman's life so deeply?
Yeah. So to start off, I actually gave birth to my daughter in August. So she's 3 months old now, and she is such a joy. She's so happy all the time. Yeah. So my book is about the symbolism of the menstrual cycle. So I studied biology in college, and I love the human body. I loved learning about the human body. And then when I was learning about the female body specifically and the reproductive cycle, there was so much information that I had not known previously and that I knew so many women in my life did not know this about their bodies. And so I thought that this was valuable information that they needed to know. And I just thought there has to be an easy way to convey this information so that not everybody has to go get a degree in biology to understand this. And so in my reading, I came across an essay that equated the four phases of the menstrual cycle to the four seasons in the environment. And that kind of blew my mind. And that kind of gave me a framework to kind of relate the biology in an easy to understand way. And so that was kind of the seed that planted the idea of my book. And then I also, when I was in college, I was obsessed with TED Talks. And so I listened to a TED Talk by a woman named Sinu Joseph. She's a menstrual health educator from India. And her TED Talk was called Unwrapping the Gifts of Menstruation. But she kind of goes into a more ancient perspective of the menstrual cycle. And in my mind, her TED Talk lined up with the idea of the cycle being represented by the seasons. And so it all just kind of clicked. And then as I was, graduating, I was in the workforce, I was just, trying to expand my mind. So I was listening to audiobooks, podcasts, talks, lectures. And there was a few things that I was listening to that it just kind of clicked in my head. And it may not seem very obvious, but my mind was like making these connections. And I just thought that this is so valuable for women to know how connected our bodies are. So I go into the symbolism of the seasons as kind of like the main thing that I talk about that represents the cycle. But I also go into the four parts of the human person: body, mind, spirit, and emotion. I talk about things like the moon. The moon has four basic phases, and that kind of lines up in a significant way with the menstrual cycle. I also talk about the cardinal directions, which is but a certain way when you look at the cardinal directions, that lines up with the menstrual cycle. And so there's just so many things in nature that relate and that can help us actually understand our bodies. And so looking at this from a perspective of kind of symbolism kind of reveals the mystery of our bodies when our bodies do feel like a mystery. And so that is kind of so again at college, the essay and the TED Talks were the kind of seed that planted and then it kind of expanded. And so then I came up with a book.
Oh my gosh, Annie, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to read this book. Oh my gosh. My heavens. So I also want to say I love TED Talks. I love TED Talks. Have you ever read the book Talk Like TED?
No, I haven't.
It is so good. That's a whole other conversation. But if any of you guys love TED Talks and you like to give TED Talks or you like to speak, Talk Like TED is an amazing book that helps you with that. Okay, so I love this idea. I cannot wait to read your book. Please walk us through. We're going to just jump right in. Walk us through the seasons and how they parallel each phase of the cycle. Let's start there to lay the groundwork, and then we'll go from there once that groundwork is been given.
Yeah, absolutely. So your cycle begins with your period when you start tracking, and that is symbolized by autumn because the red blood is represented by the red falling leaves during autumn. And In autumn, the temperature is low, and so your hormones and your basal body temperature are low. And so that's how that lines up. Then after autumn, you have winter. So in your body, in the environment, winter is when the temperature is low and the snow covers the ground. And so in your body, what is happening during that season is after your period is the follicular phase. So that is when the follicles are maturing in your ovaries. And this is very much a hidden growth. So your hormones are low and your basal body temperature is low. So there doesn't seem like there's anything happening on the surface, but the follicles in your ovary are maturing. So it's like the hidden growth that happens during winter under the snow. And like the cold temperatures during winter, your basal body temperature is low. And so also if you see cervical mucus, if your body presents cervical mucus throughout your cycle, you're going to have the thick, sticky white cervical mucus, and that's mirrored in the white snow. So then after the follicular phase, one of the follicles in your ovaries is mature. And so it releases its L during ovulation. And so after winter is spring. And so ovulation is spring. So your ovary releases an egg cell. That's like the blooming flowers during spring. Your cervical mucus thins out. It becomes thin and watery and less acidic and kind of stretchy. And that is mirrored in the rain that we normally see during spring. And so spring is just the time of fertility and energy and the beautiful blooming flowers. And so that is reflected in our bodies when we're feeling, because of the estrogen, we're feeling more beautiful and outgoing. And then with the releasing of that's reflected in kind of just the fertility and of spring. And so then after ovulation, you have the luteal phase. And so that is when the follicle in your ovary is degenerating. It's releasing progesterone as well as estrogen. And progesterone increases your basal body temperature. It gives you feelings of nurturing and maternal affection, and it heightens your emotions. And then progesterone also rebuilds that endometrial lining. So then that's reflected in summer because summer is a time of like the harvest and the bustling plant and animal life and the hot sun. So the hot temperatures of summer are reflected in your high basal body temperature, which is raised because of progesterone. And it gives you that feelings, or sorry, the nurturingness of your feelings is reflected in the kind of fertility of the earth during summer. I call progesterone the mother nature hormone because it kind of makes us like mother nature. And then the high emotions are reflected in the hot sun and things like that of summer. And so once the progesterone runs out, once your ovaries stop producing that progesterone, your uterus is going to shed that endometrial lining again, and that's going to bring you back to fall. So as you may know, your period is actually the end of your cycle. So when you go through puberty, you start in the follicular phase and then when you receive your first period, it's actually the end of your cycle. So in a beautiful way, autumn is kind of the beginning and the end of the year because you have the falling of the red leaves, but it's also just a time of new beginnings. So that's basically how your cycle's reflected in the seasons.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a beautiful way to look at the menstrual cycle and to see the seasons. I have it in my book as well. I'm trying to think, I think I might have it a little different. I think there's a little different ways maybe to look at the seasons, but yours makes complete sense. Yesterday I was in practice and it happens a lot. Like I've always asked where you are in your cycle to all my patients, if they're cycling women. Everybody was on their period. So, like, it's funny how in a sense, there is, I think, a rhythm in nature about cycles. And so, if that was true, and not that every woman would be on their period at the same time, but it does make sense to me that, especially when we talk about, and I want to next, the phases of the moon, that there would be kind of a general kind of like most women may have this pattern. And so, it made sense to me. Well, yeah, everybody's on their period today. And
Mhm.
in 2 weeks, I think everybody will be ovulating, around then. So with the phases of the moon, tell us about the science of how that works with the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, so I look at the moon in a symbolic sense. So you can definitely see anecdotally that women get synced up, but from my perspective and based on the research that I've done about that, I do believe that that is more of a phenomenon. It's something called oscillating frequency. So when you are sitting at a stoplight and everybody has their blinkers on, sometimes the blinkers will line up and then sometimes they go out of sync and then sometimes and they go back in sync. So I think it's more of that kind of phenomenon where we're cycling and then sometimes we have those moments of connection and then sometimes we're not cycling at the same time. But then in regards to the moon, I look at it in a symbolic sense. So I look at it from kind of the shape of the moon and reflecting what's happening in our ovaries. So when the moon is dark, the new moon, that kind of it lines up with your period because there's no egg cell present during your period. And then during the next season, the follicular phase, the follicles and it is maturing in your ovaries, so it's growing. And so that's reflected in the waxing moon, that the shape of the moon is growing in the sky. And then ovulation is represented by the full moon because the egg cell is released and the full moon is bright with, bright and full, just like, our mood and the fullness of our fertility and during ovulation. And then as the corpus luteum degenerates during the luteal phase, that's represented by the waning moon.
Hmm. It's very interesting. Like there's so much symbolism, like you said, about, regarding our cycle and not just, our the depth of womanhood, but even, yeah, nature, thinking about seasons and thinking about the moon. So tell us about let's work in this conversation the the ways that women can reflect on these four parts of the human person. So as we're moving through our cycle, how can women be reflective when they're in their period, when they're in that
Mhm.
follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and then the luteal phase? What are ways that women can be invited to be reflective?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these symbols are really good memory devices. They kind of help you, you ask the women in your practice, Teresa, what phase of your menstrual cycle are you in? And so to have the language of the seasons or of these other symbols, it kind of helps you remember, oh yeah, I'm in summer right now. And so then obviously next is going to be my period because that's autumn that follows after summer. And so that's helpful on a practical level. But yeah, on a deeper level, we can really dive into how our menstrual cycle can actually help us grow as a person. And so as humans, we're made up of bodies, mind, soul, and emotion. And so during your period, you're kind of grounded in your body. And so that's is the season that's symbolized by the body because you're bleeding, you're very much grounded in the physicality of the world. You may be experiencing painful cramps, uncomfortable symptoms. So you're very much grounded in your body. And so you can reflect also the shedding of the blood kind of reminds us of our mortality as humans. And so we can just reflect on that we are embodied and that our bodies like we got God made the world physical for a reason. And so it kind of helps us reflect on that. So the next phase, the follicular phase, since your hormones are low, this actually gives your brains space to kind of work more efficiently. And so women can kind of feel more like clarity of mind. They can feel more productive, more efficient during the season. And so that's why that's symbolized by the mind. And so you can really kind of lean into that and like maybe read those intellectual books that you have on your to read list. And, you can work more efficiently. And so you can get a lot, maybe get a lot more done. So that is why the follicular phase is symbolized by the mind. So the next phase, ovulation, is symbolized by the spirit because ovulation happens and brings along a rise in estrogen. And so estrogen gives us feelings of openness and receptivity, which in a biological sense obviously opens us up to fertility, but it also affects us at a deeper level. It affects our soul. And so we can experience a more openness and receptivity in a more spiritual sense during this season. So that's why ovulation is symbolized by the spirit. And then the next phase, the luteal phase, that high progesterone affects our brain, specifically the hypothalamus. And so that causes like high emotions, brain fog. And so that's why the luteal phase is symbolized by emotion, because our emotions, just all of our emotions increase during that season. And so if we're experiencing good emotions, then that's good. It progesterone does help us be more nurturing, but it can also just increase negative emotion as well. And so, really taking your time to step back and to reflect and to contemplate during your luteal phase specifically can really help you grow in emotional awareness and it can help you grow as a person. And so, that is why when you're, as you said, you're kind of reflecting, you're kind of leaning into these different aspects of who you are as a person throughout the different phases of your menstrual cycle, you can grow and mature in your character as a person.
Awesome. So let's move on. I think one thing I want to stop, and I think Jamie is going to also do our podcast sponsors, but I do want to mention right now, because this is new for us, and it does, of course, have to do with the menstrual cycle, is our perimenopause program. Because as you reach perimenopause, you're still going through your menstrual cycles, but you're just having a lot of changes. And as you mentioned, Annie, the emotional part of the luteal phase, I think in perimenopause, like if anything, we know that there's a lot of changes in our emotions. And so you can imagine all of this symbolism really fits with perimenopause. Our program was just released. It's on our website, www.hormonegenius.com. It's $97. And I'm just going to share with you the value of that is amazing because of what you get in this program. You actually get an incredible amount of content, including an ebook, including, an amazing amount of videos. We did a lot of videos with case studies and workouts and nutrition, everything. So I just want you to check that out. If you are in perimenopause, this is going to be a program important to you. Also, I want to mention Fiat Institute, Jamie's hormone coaching program, still always an incredible opportunity to actually kind of continue to spread this work of the Hormone Genius podcast and helping women help other women. And you can become a certified hormone coach through Jamie's program at Fiat Institute. So please check that out at fiatinstitute.com as well. And Jamie, I'll throw it over to you to just mention our podcast sponsors today.
Yes, totally. We always want to give a shout out to We Heart Nutrition. We love We Heart Nutrition for their amazing supplements, and they now have male supplements. So if you're married, you have a boyfriend, brothers, father, whatever, they do now make supplements for men, which is incredible. If you visit their website, www.weheartnutrition.com, and type genius at checkout, you will receive 20% off of your order, which is incredible. Secondly, we have a podcast sponsor for this month called Tiny Health. And for those of you who feel like they're eating right, managing your stress well, taking your supplements, you're working out, whatever, and you're still really struggling, a key factor may be your gut microbiome. And so, again, this episode is brought to you by Tiny Health. It is the first and only microbiome test designed for all ages and stages of life, even newborn babies, which I think is incredible. And so the reason Tiny Health is different is they use whole genome sequencing, and it's the same technology used in cutting edge research labs to show you exactly what microbes are in your gut and your vaginal microbiome, which I think is also very unique and different. When you take the test, you will get a dashboard and it'll give you all of your results. It will give you specific diet recommendations, supplement recommendations, lifestyle recommendations. As a coach, that's so important. So I love Tiny Health. We've used this for my son, and then I'm waiting for my results. I just use this for my, so it's incredible. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to purchase this yourself, there is $50 off of your test with the code Hormone Genius. All you need to do is visit tinyhealth.com, type in the code Hormone Genius to get $50 off your test. It is well worth it, ladies and gentlemen. Please know that. So thank you to our podcast sponsors. All right. With that, Annie, thank you for allowing us to give a shout out to our sponsors there. Annie, how would you say this information has impacted your own personal life and maybe also impacted those you come across, your friends, those who read your books? Like, what have you gotten as feedback in terms of how this insight has helped people in your circle and then you personally as well?
Yeah, I was very so saying about kind of perimenopause and the changes that we go through as women. I think that relating your body to the seasons can kind of help you process that because a lot of times I just feel like, why can't it all just be the same all the time? But the seasons change and that's beautiful. And it helps the seasons changing is what allows the fertility of nature to happen. And so the seasons changing in our bodies is what allows so many good things to take place in our bodies. So for me, the way that this has impacted me is that when I started thinking about this and I was relating this to the seasons, I was reflecting on my own feelings, my own symptoms, and I was able to tell what phase of the cycle I was in at the time. I just knew what phase of my cycle I was in. And I didn't really, sometimes I would question like, is it that have I entered into the luteal phase yet? And then there were just signs and I just had this kind of peace and this contentment, knowing where I was in my cycle, knowing when to give myself a little slack. And was really helpful. And that's kind of like, it almost was like a self-discovery. And then that I put into this book. And that's because I really want other women to have this knowledge and to understand the value of their own bodies. And then I feel like you had another part of that question and I can't agree.
My question was just to like, how have people who've read the book shared how these insights have helped them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the feedback that I've gotten is just kind of amazement, just kind of, wow, this is amazing. And this is so insightful. And that women are just excited about it. So I went to a conference and I had a vendor table. And so I had the kind of pictures of the seasons out. And I said, what phase of your cycle are you in now? Most women didn't know, but then the women who did know, they would say, oh, I'm in phase or whatever. And I said, do you know that's symbolized by summer because of all the things that I talked about earlier? And their eyes would light up and they would go, wow, that makes sense. And I said, okay, so then what's after summer is autumn. So your period's coming soon. And they're just like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is definitely going to help me remember in the future, stuff like that. So yeah, I've been so honored to get a lot of positive feedback.
It's amazing. I mean, we've experienced this a lot. I know Jamie and I have, of the wonderment and in like just the how come I've never learned this before, right? Just the fact that women don't learn this information. And when they do, they're just profoundly like, wow, how did I not know this about my body? And so I think your experience speaks to that. And you took it just a lot deeper in wanting to really go through quite a bit of symbolism and self discovery, like you said, to put it all in a book, which, we're thankful for because that will help a lot of women. Do you chart your cycles, Annie? And I guess with this, is that something you talked about in the book, is like tracking your cycle? And personally, do you chart your cycles, or do you just kind of intuitively, like you were saying, kind of live through kind of how you feel in a sense where you're at?
Both. So I definitely charted or tracked my cycle. I'm postpartum now, so I'm in the kind of like pre-follicular phase, so my hormones are low and I haven't ovulated since giving birth. So I don't know. I think that I'm part of the mentality that I have is helpful in knowing that, knowing where I am, even as I'm going through changes and having a family and stuff like that, having this kind of background like helps me understand where I am coming back into the menstrual cycle after pregnancy and birth. So it's a both and so I do get into like a little bit more detail with the hormones, follicle stimulating hormone in the book, a little bit more than what I talked about today. But so
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, it's such an important conversation because there is so much wonder and awe. And like you're saying, in the postpartum season, there's all these seasons of women's life. We're gonna experience these seasons whether we're menstruating or not, metaphorically in this time. So, before we get our period, we're in a sense in our pre-ovulatory phase. We're waiting, and then we start menstruating, we're living our childbearing years, we wrap that up, and again, like overlaying the seasons is what I see this book being. You're overlaying these rhythms of life, and there we all know, not all of us, but many of us are now discovering, wow, we have a fertility cycle. We don't need birth control. We can live fully alive in our hormone genius. Okay, that's one layer. That's one rhythm. But then once we understand that rhythm, seeing that there's also layering rhythms that we can lay one on top of the other. There's depth and there's beauty, and you know what, Annie? I bet there's even more layers that we don't even understand, until, end times. Who knows? Okay, so we talked about your book, Annie. We talked about the cycle. We talked about how it lines up with, again, these rhythms. So knowing all of that, and we're going to kind of wrap up here with our last question. What do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
yeah, I wish everyone knew how valuable they are and how valuable your hormones are to you, not only to your health physically, but also to your whole person. As I said, the menstrual cycle can actually help you grow as a whole person. And so having this valuable, this dignity that we have as women, it's so valuable for then going out and living your life. I want every woman to have the peace and confidence to go out and live their life to the fullest. And so when you understand kind of going to the start, going to your hormones, you understand your body and the cycles that you're going through, then that follows. And you can then live out your life with confidence.
That's great, Annie. How can people get a hold of your book? Give us the title again. Where is it available? And then if you want to share any other resources or social media, you can give those details as well.
Yeah. So again, you can find my book on Amazon. It's called Women of All Seasons, The Symbolism of the Menstrual Cycle. So I sell it on Amazon. You can get the link to that through my website, womenofallseasons.com. I also have some digital products for sale on my website, womenofallseasons.com. I have a cycle syncing guide and then just more details about the hormones. And then on Instagram, I am women.ofallseason. And so you can follow me and see what's happening and any updates on Instagram.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie, for being on the Hormone Genius podcast today. Wish you the best with your growing family, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel, so if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.